Dobro vam večer. Evo, večeras prije nego što po prvi puta predstavimo Riječkom kazalištu Filozofski teatar, htjela bih samo reći nekoliko riječi o povijesti ovog specifičnog programa. Naime, 2014. godine Srećko Horvat, kada sam došla u Hrvatsko narodno kazalište u Zagrebu, Srećko Horvat i ja pokrenuli smo nešto što se zvalo i sad još uvijek zove Filozofski teatar. Naime, činilo nam se da između filozofije i teatra postoji itekako duboka i dubinska veza i da zapravo je prirodno na neki način da se filozofija govori u teatru. Tako smo od 2014. do 2022. Gotovo svaki mjesec ugostili nekog od velikih, ne samo filozofa, nego i mislioca, nekih od onih osoba koji su izmijenili izgled društva i vremena u kojem smo živjeli. Samo da nabrojim neke od Slavoja Žigičeka, Tarika Alija, Julije Kristeve, Richarda Seneta, Varoufakisa, Toma Pikettyja, Vanessa Redgrave, Margarete von Trotta, Mia A. Zapravo doista ličnosti iz različitih područja, kažem ne samo filozofije nego kulture i uopće društvenog života. I sve su ta susreti sa brojnom publikom koja je ispunjavala dvoranu do posljednjih mjesta, kao što vi večeras ispunjavate dvoranu ovog teatra, doista bila uzbudljiva putovanja u neke druge prostore koji su isto tako i teatarski. Iznimno mi je drago da evo Srećko Horvat živi u ovom gradu već neko vrijeme i da smo na samom početku zapravo mog mandata imamo priliku ponovno uspostaviti Filozofski teatar, ovaj puta u Rijeci. Nadam se da ćete tijekom ovih mjeseci uživati u gostima koje ćemo ugostiti na ovoj pozornici, da ćete i vi razgovarati s njima, da ćemo otvoriti dijalog sa vremenom i da će biti zabavno. Evo, hvala vam što ste došli u ovako velikom broju večeras i pozivam Srećka da predstavi program, a i našeg večerašnjeg gosta.
Dobro večer Rijeka, velika mi je čast i trema istovremeno biti ovdje pred vama. Čujem da je puno kazalište, ali ne vidim vas još uvijek, tako da nadam se da ćemo se i vidjeti tokom razgovora. Kažem, velika mi je čast, jako sam uzbuđen da po prvi puta večeras predstavljamo Filozofski teatar upravo u Rijeci, program koji će, nadam se, zahvaljujući vama i nama, zaživjeti u ovom gradu. Ovo je tek prvi događaj i sad da ne duljim previše, samo ću ukratko predstaviti gosta i onda se gost pridružuje na pozornici. Dakle, Nikolaj Schultz je mladi danski sociolog, rođen 1990. sad relativno mlad, u Aarhusu u Danskoj. Svakako je mlađi od mene i ovo je zapravo jedan od rijetkih događaja gdje netko jest mlađi od mene i nadam se da će biti još mlađi i od njega u budućnosti. Postoji puno mladih ljudi koji imaju puno toga za reći, kao što ćemo vidjeti večeras. Vrlo rano se počeo baviti sociologijom, to je po obrazovanju. Počeo je surađivati sa poznatim francuskim filozofom Bruno Latourom, s kojim je između ostaloga i objavio knjigu koju možete kupiti, kao što su mi rekli da moram reći, po promotivnoj cijeni izvan, ali vam i ja sugeriram da je kupite, pričat ćemo večeras o njoj, Memorandum o novoj ekološkoj klasi. Da ne otkrivam više o knjizi, kroz razgovor ćete saznati više. I iste godine objavljuje knjigu koja me zapravo i dovela do njegovog rada, koja nažalost još nije prevedena na naš jezik, niti igdje drugdje u susjedstvu, Land Sickness. Knjiga koja mislim svatko treba pročitati, s kojom on uspostavlja neku vrstu novog egzistencijalizma. Njegov rad je hvalen od svih živih, od Slavoja Žižeka do Hansa Ubriha do mnogih drugih. Zeit njemački ga je nazvao nadolezačom zvijezdom sociologije. U međuvremenu dosta radi i sa arhitektima i sa slikarima i piše i nove knjige. Razlog zašto smo upravo njega zvali u Rijeku kao prvog gosta jeste i tema o kojoj će večeras biti riječi. To je egzistencija i smisao generalno u doba antropocena, klimatska kriza i sve što je povezano uz to. Također Nikolaj Schultz dolazi također iz jednog lučkog grada, tako da ćemo se, nadam se, dotaknuti i tih tema. Pa eto, it's my great honor to invite Nikolaj finally on the stage. I hope he can hear me behind the curtain. Maybe you can invite him with a big applause.
There's a big room for big topics.
Yeah, we need a big room for big topics. Let's immediately start. It's your first time in Rijeka, and I'm really glad that you arrived here to this beautiful theater. But let's start, from the pretty dark topics. Yesterday we have been together at Cankarjev Dom in Ljubljana, where we had a similar event with much less people, by the way, although it's a much bigger city than Rijeka, so thanks again for coming. And, well, we learned a lot. I learned a lot from you, but we also learned a lot from people we met in Slovenia. So, for instance, we learned that the cost, the damage of the disastrous floods in Slovenia 2023 was around 10% of Slovenia's GDP, something like 10 billion euros, which immediately brings us into the reality of climate crisis. We also learned from, I hope, a future friend of ours from this Slovenian oceanographer, that if the sea level, I guess many people here also know this, that if the sea level rises 1 meter, which is the projection until the end of this century, we will immediately have something around 3 million refugees. Not to mention what will happen to port cities such as Rijeka, which I guess most of you know very well that this part would then be covered by the sea. We also learned, which was kind of funny, I think, when he said that the jellyfish is actually a climate refugee. Why jellyfish? We mentioned jellyfish as jellyfish because that's becoming also a reality in the Adriatic Sea, because it's getting warmer, and then the jellyfish as a climate refugee actually escapes even more warmer seas to the Adriatic Sea, which is becoming kind of tropical. We also spoke a lot about the collapse of the Gulf Stream, which would have disastrous effects, especially on your part of the world, Nordic countries, which would then probably freeze everything to Bristol. And then we were on dinner, and we went out to have a break, to have a cigarette break. And in front of us, if you remember, I mean, it was yesterday, probably you remember, there were some youngsters from Slovenia who were doing some fun around a street lamp. So you know what people usually do when they are drunk. And so they were jumping around it and so on. And you were smoking a cigarette, watching at them, and said something like that, correct me if I'm wrong, oh, it would be nice to be them instead of us talking about the end of the world. So my question is, when did this start? And can you ever get rid of this existential angst, or what a guy from your country, Søren Kierkegaard, would call trembling? Can you ever get away from it? And when did you start to feel this, which we will discuss a bit further in this book, Land Sickness?
But they were having fun.
Exactly. I also had fun. I hope you had some fun as well. I don't know.
Oceanographers are very serious people. It's true what you say. The sea levels are rising. The Earth system are showing us many signs that we are living on another planet that is reacting to how we are inhabiting it, to how we organize our economies and so on and so forth. We saw it in Slovenia 2 years ago, right? We saw it in California a couple of weeks ago. We see it all the time. Every news, every time we turn on our TV, we're realizing that the world has changed. It's turned into something different. People, of course, tend to use the term the Anthropocene or new climatic regime or Capitalocene. They count the numbers, they count the terms in hundreds. But what they all agree on, again, is that we are inhabiting a planet that is slowly losing its habitability due to us. Now, we are moving the Earth, and what I'm interested in with the last part of your question is how that is moving us. Because my fundamental hypothesis in the book Land Sickness is that it also certainly somehow reshapes simply what it means to be a human being. The world has changed, the human being has changed because we are the cause behind this earthly transformation, this earthly mutation. Each of every one of us, you're not the same people as you were before. Because we have realized that being a human being today simply means you're dragging behind you a set of destructive traces that are somehow returning like a boomerang, threatening your own conditions of existence. No matter if you buy a shirt, if you take an airplane, if you go through the supermarket and eat meat and so on and so forth, these problems follow you in your footsteps. They are your footsteps. And that, of course, comes with a certain form of trembling and anxiety, a vertigo and nausea, which is another sort of nausea, another sort of trembling, another sort of anxiety than the old existentialists were posing. To make things very short, if you read somebody like Sartre, it was a question of realizing that you have endless freedom to choose in a world devoid of meaning. But today, what is obvious to most people, or many people, even if you look away a little bit, sometimes if you live in bad faith, mauvais foi, as Sartre would say, is that there is a new sort of anxiety related to the external traces of your freedom that is certainly, let's say, destroying your own possibilities of existence as a species. Can you look away? Of course you can. The guys yesterday looked in the direction of a bar instead. But nonetheless, we all faced with it somehow. Of course we all do. We need somehow to, like for the sake of our psychological well-being, to sometimes look the other direction. Again, imagine the situation that you're walking through an airport. Of course you have to go to the gate, but you still know that something is behind you. Traces that is actually making the world shrink. My argument would be that we shouldn't escape, neither individually or collectively. That we have to face this new situation, that we need to look not only the new planet in the eyes, but also look ourselves in the eyes as a new species, as a new existence, as a human being that has turned into a strange creature. Not a very nice creature, necessarily, but one we nonetheless have to develop an affectual, a narrative, and a conceptual language to understand the shape, the contours, the silhouettes of. Because I'm afraid that our dear friend, the oceanographer, was right. It's not looking good. So that's what I'm interested in these days. And of course, to return to where you started the conversation, it's interesting to imagine that we are in a city like Rijeka, which, like my own home city of Aarhus in Denmark, also a little silly city nobody knows what is, where you, of course, kind of see on a sort of emblematic, let's say, image of what we were, what we believed in, and where we are now. Why? The port city, I mean, if I'm not completely wrong, then Rijeka was a city that at the end of the 19th century was extremely rich, commerce and so on and so forth. The port as an image, as an emblem, so to say, always somehow characterized, symbolized the dreams of expansion, of progress, of prosperity, and so on and so forth. And now, it's the first place that will sink. The same thing could be said about islands. Maybe you want to speak about that later. But again, so for me, a city like my own hometown and a city like Rijeka somehow becomes a laboratory for thinking about our historical situation. We used to be moderns that believed in freedom, that believed in growth, that believed that economizing our relationships to the world would somehow make us prosperous. Right now, we're standing in an odd, new universal situation where we realize that it did the opposite. It actually destroyed our possibilities collectively of prosperity. So, yeah, tough times. It's a long monologue. It's been a long week. I need to get started.
Yeah, but on that note, I think since we started with, by the way, you didn't respond completely to my question. When did it all start in your case? That you became aware, that you became sensitive about these topics?
That's a good question. I think I began working on the topic around 10 years ago or something like that. I mean, you didn't have to be a genius in 2014 to realize that sociology would be a dead discipline if it weren't somehow catching along to the question of ecology and climate change and so on and so forth. I don't remember my own moment of click, the moment that I really began being afraid. So to say, where I really began having climate anxiety once in a while. Of course, it's not something I have all the time. You have to somehow dispense yourself. But I think around 18, 19, and certainly also the summers of 2021, it began close. It became obvious that this was not something abstract. It was not something far away. It was something right here, right now, that was threatening our collective existence. I mean, I think for a long time we had this odd way of speaking about these questions, if it was for future generations, or we have to take care of the planet for those to come. No. Again, the amount of people that are already on the run for climate change, global south, the amount of people in LA right now that are seeing their houses burning down, the amount of people in Slovenia a couple of years ago, and of course in Valencia, where 300 people died just a couple of weeks ago. This is our situation now, and I think that was around 2018, 19, where like, but of course I guess what you're referring to is the beginning of the book.
Exactly, but we'll also come back to 2018 and 2019 because that was actually the beginning of Fridays for Future and the huge, not anymore children, but at that time, yes, school children's movement. So we'll come back to that, but I would really love, I know you don't do that very often, and you accepted, I hope, to do it tonight. And the book is not translated into our language yet, so it's also a good, let's say, challenge to creation publishers, but also to everyone to reach out for this book. If you could just read out the first few pages, which I think will bring the audience directly into your soul, to put it like that.
I told him not to do that.
Yeah, but what can you do?
It never stops. The problems never seem to leave me alone. They follow me around all day, from morning to evening, from sunrise to sunset. They've been doing so for a long time now, but tonight is different. Now they even follow me into my dreams. I've been going to bed late for a while, not by choice, but because the heat in this city is unbearable. The warmth incapacitates my body and mind. Everything seems slow, each minute longer, every movement heavier. It's yet another heat wave in Paris. One of those that used to be unusual, but had come to seem normal, or at least familiar. The heat exhausts me. I'm tired and I need to sleep, but as I close my eyes, my heartbeat speeds up. A tingle runs through my arms into my fingers as my chest tightens up and my neck stiffens. I'm not sure what came first, the feeling or the thought, but I know this. The problems have caught up with me. The breeze that was supposed to calm me down has triggered the alarm bell. The fan, the ventilator that I cannot sleep without, turbocharges my energy consumption, emitting more CO2 into the atmosphere, resulting in yet more heat. Cooling down my body has a price, a cost, probably first or most violently paid somebody else's, most likely somewhere in the global south. I turn over and glance through the small cracks between my curtains. How do the people living across the road under the metal roof manage? Their flat is small, even smaller than mine, with only one window, making it almost impossible for the air to circulate, and I doubt they have any air condition. They must be suffocating in there. It seems the Anthropocene is not a nice place to sleep. Even if I am exhausted, I suppose I could make the most of it and work as I normally do and sleep. But as I roll over, prepare myself to get up, I remember that this part of my life too has become haunted. Yesterday morning I realized that what I always wished for, having my name on the cover of a book, displayed in some Parisian bookstore, sends me hundreds of miles away, plants my feet straight in some ancient woods, contributing to deforestation. With each word printed on paper in black ink, transported from far away, volatile organic compounds are released into the atmosphere. With every single page of the book I write, the more deeply intertwined I become with the issues. Maybe just a little bit, but enough to be an active participant in the unfolding of a planetary emergency. Sirens grow louder and then disappear as an ambulance races along below the street. I'm now wide awake, sitting up in bed, hands locked between my thighs. It seems that the only stable structure left is the wall supporting my back. I lack a sense of direction. I've lost my bearings. Behind me, in front of me, alongside me, up in the sky, below my feet, I see nothing but signs of this mess. Wherever I fix my gaze or turn my imagination, I recognize the disturbing trails of my own being, its activities and its doings. My sight blurs in the dark and I begin to feel short of breath. These problems dog my footsteps. No worse, they are my footsteps. How can I aspire to anything when all possible points view reminds me of the points of life I disturb? How can I dream at night when my last thought are moral vertigo over the cost of my sleep? How can I dream during the day if what makes me in the morning further implicated in the catastrophe? These issues do not go away. They accompany every morning when I read the newspaper and learn about yet another manifestation of climate change. This afternoon it might have been 43 degrees in Paris, but in California it was 54. In Central Europe, hundreds of people are dead because of flooding, and in Indonesia, dozens are still missing after a cyclone struck a few months ago. The problems fill up my basket when I do my grocery shopping, item by item, each wrapped in plastic that ends up in the ocean somewhere. I stopped eating meat, but the avocados, the quinoa I opted for instead are causing soil degradation and water shortage where they are grown. In the mornings, the coffee I need to wake up my mind destroys soils, discharges waste and pollution into foreign rivers. The problem even splash on my shoulders when I take a shower, with each minute under the streaming water releasing more CO2 into the atmosphere. These issues are not easy to digest. They cannot be washed away or covered up. Each day I learn how another aspect of my life is interpenetrated with these problems and how my being in the world entangles me in these troubles. Every day I realize that the problem is me.
Thanks a lot. And a big applause, please. Could you, before we go further, just reveal a little spoiler for the audience who didn't read it yet? What happens then? You travel to a Greek island in order to escape, and what do you find out?
Yeah, I think it's important to maybe first describe a little bit what sort of book it is. I call it like a hybrid auto-ethnograph fictive narrative, right? So it is based on my own actually anxiety or climate anxiety, climate breakdown a couple of years ago, and then it's kind of narrated in a semi-fictive way, mixed up with a lot of theory. So if you read it as a novel, it's absolutely awful. I'm not a real writer. If you read it as a theory book, it's not very good as well. But if you accept that it's kind of like a hybrid thing in between, maybe it works a little bit. So again, truly enough, I was there, like many of my friends. I can tell you, if you live in Paris or if you live through any heat waves and it's 40 degrees at night, or sorry, during the day, and 35 at night, maybe even. It's hot. It's not very nice to sleep. So it does begin to feel sort of, how do you say, claustrophobic. It sits in your body and your mind and your soul and so on and so forth. So of course, what you try to do is that you try to escape. It's a completely normal thing to try to do, which I truly enough also tried to the day after in what actually happened. What happened was that the day after I woke up and I was freaking out a little bit about the whole situation, my friend calls me and invites me to an island where his boat or his parents' boat were docking. I take the train. The interesting thing is, of course, that the first day, just that I arrive at the island, you see that there is no escape to these issues, because I go down on the beach. My friends say, go. Have a little afternoon by yourself. It takes me approximately 15 minutes before I find a place, and an old woman comes over to me and tells me, can you please find somewhere else to stay? I'm from here, I was born here, moi je suis pas congolais, but there's no space left to me. Why? Well, because this island as well is disappearing under the forces of production on the one hand, because of over-tourism, on the other hand, because of climate change. The shores are simply, let's say, eroding, right? So what I used the narrative to, this sort of escape, is to somehow describe that, of course, even if we psychologically somehow try to look the other direction, self-defense mechanism, there is no escape. There is no outside to these issues. And that's a necessary, I think, existential, let's say, thing to realize. Again, as I said before, that we have to face this situation and then take it from there. Because the earth is shivering under all of us, no matter where we go, and we'll only see that continuing, of course. So that's the beginning of the story.
Exactly, and yeah, we might come back to the book, but before my next question, it reminded me on a quote by someone who said, "There are no islands anymore," and guess who it was? Adolf Hitler in 1930s. It was connected to Nazism. His theory was that if he is successful at Nazism, there are no islands anymore. And luckily he was not correct.
In the book as well. That's not very good.
Huh?
I write the same thing. I said.
You do?
Yeah, I said they're not even.
And you didn't know it was by Adolf.
No, I didn't know that I didn't put him in the biography.
Yeah, don't worry.
Remember to reference.
But anyhow, luckily he was not right, although he might be right again with fascism and Nazism coming back. But I think this quote perfectly also describes the climate crisis. I would love to come back to a year you mentioned, which is 2018 and 2019, with a little anecdote. I'm sorry if it will be a bit longer, but it will set the context for my next question. So recently, when I was in Serbia, I met a good friend of mine whose name is Galeb. Probably some of you know him. He has one of the most famous podcasts in the Balkans now. And previously, he was working for MTV, but also for Vice. And then at one night in Belgrade, he revealed me a story which I didn't know from Vice. So he was the editor of Vice in Serbia. So in 2018, Vice existed in several European countries, and their biggest challenge was that they were trying to find local topics in each country, let's say in Denmark, in Sweden, in Serbia, and so on. And the problem was, how would you create out of a local topic a topic which would be a European topic, a topic which would be pan-European, to put it like that, which of course would then have benefits on business. So how to find something which is hot and sexy and which people wouldn't just dismiss as something which is happening in, I don't know, Valjevo or Aarhus or whatever city. So at one of their meetings, colleagues, editors from Sweden come to the meeting and they say, look, something interesting is happening. There is a little girl protesting every day against the climate. And the headquarters in London called a meeting and called all the offices from all around Europe, including Eastern Europe. And they said, look, this is happening. We think this is finally something. Vice wasn't that big yet at that moment, but after that it went global. And the little girl also became global. And they were one of the first at the start. So they had access, they had contacts, and they were already in the story. So what they said is, okay, this is an opportunity for us. We can now use this story to create a European topic, which would then, of course, benefit the business. And the London headquarters invites officers from Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, and Serbia. And they were perplexed. They said, okay, this is being clicked, and the engagement and the increase is incredible. It's, explosive in all the countries except yours. So what's happening? And then a guy from Romania said, in very bad, typical, not very bad, but typical Eastern European accent. So they asked, so why isn't it increasing the engagement in your country? And he said, quote, because we have real problems in our language. That was 6 years ago. In the meantime, well, as we all know, we still have real problems, but we also have climate problems. So we always had climate problems. In Serbia, for instance, from where this anecdote comes from, in the meantime, climate has become one of the central topics connected to extractivism of lithium, for instance, and Rio Tinto, but also the German car industry, Volkswagen, and all those green cars which now need lithium. At the same time, if you go, for instance, to Serbia or to Banja Luka or to Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina, you will see that most of the apartments, most of the people already have air purifiers. Luckily, this is not a problem yet, most of the time in Rijeka, but in the rest of the Balkans, including Hungary and so on, this is a huge problem. Like in Serbia, I think the statistics is that 20,000 people have premature death because of air pollution. In Croatia, it seems this is still not, correct me if I'm wrong, you will have an opportunity, of course. This is still not one of the central topics, climate crisis, because we have real problems, like the Romanians had. And the real problems are corruption, over-tourism, elections, one or the same president becoming a president again, and all these kind of real problems. So how would you explain that? Obviously, many things shifted in the global context, and climate crisis definitely became one of the central topics. But how to explain this kind of, is it denialism, or what is it? And how to overpass this problem of real problems, which I think we can understand very well, especially in Croatia, when someone is fired or doesn't have a job, or is worried about his or her daily existence. How can those people be convinced that actually climate crisis is connected and intertwined with their lives already?
That's a very big question. I think we should go back to where you started. It's actually rarely have the possibility to answer that question, but it's true. It's very interesting to think what happened in 2018 and 2019, because no matter if the creations have real problems, then it was obviously completely fascinating to realize that even if for a long time, for decades, we've been hearing about these things since the 50s, 60s, we've been hearing about these disastrous climatic mutations, ecological changes, and so on and so forth. We all knew it, but they had no political sharpness. They had no political, let's say, tonality that was on par with the situation we're facing. And then came Greta. Absolutely fascinating. Bruno Latour said that she was like Jeanne d'Arc, sent from God to declare war. Here in Rijeka, if I'm not wrong, you have Caroline Rijeka, right, who was saying, no, no more. In 3 years, in 2 years even, the general, on a global level, climate consciousness, the climate mobilization, even if not on par with the situation, the climate knowledge, the climate, let's say, seriosity, completely shifted. It's true. In no way are we, again, to repeat myself, on par with the situation we find ourselves in, and it has gone down, especially after the war in Ukraine and the war in Palestine and Israel and so on and so forth. It's difficult to navigate in. But still, compared to where we were before, it's very important to remember that how fast actually something changed. We all changed worlds. We all realized that we were living on another planet. Another planet where there are certainly also other problems. I'm not sure I'm the right person to explain the Croatian situation. It's very unfair of you, my dear friend, to ask me to do that. But of course, it's very interesting to pose the question on a general level, because you're absolutely right that even in most European countries, the question of the climate, every time there is a voting poll on the most important topics, it's almost the highest, right? Yet every time there is an election, they are completely annihilated, the climate movements. In France, when me and Bruno, just before we wrote that book, we were exactly trying to fathom this situation. How come that the question of the climate, the ecological mutations, have not only manifested itself as one, but the political question of our times, at least on a European scale somehow, and at the same time, every time there is election, there is absolutely no support to them. What is this misalignment? What is this disconnection between the catastrophe that we know is growing, we see it every day, and we do pay somehow attention to it, and the lack of political ethics that it fosters? Again, in France, just 2022, we knew the election was coming. Before we wrote our book, we were right. They had 5% of the votes, more or less. They just, if I'm not wrong, had their political campaign supported because of the amount of voters they have. And I remember in Denmark a couple of months later, because I was there at the Green Party's conference, they were celebrating it as a civilizational victory that they had 3% of the votes. So where does this, again, misalignment come from? Again, there's of course many ways to answer this question. It's a huge question. One of the arguments would be, as I'm sure we'll talk about later as well, is that the Greens never actually made a strong ideological work for what they were fighting for. To simplify a movie, or simplify, because it could have been a movie, it is a movie, to simplify the story, then the last 50 years or something like that, the narrative have sounded a little bit the same. As soon as the disaster was coming close enough, as soon as we knew it, as soon as the science had been settled, we would all walk hand in hand like a bunch of hippies and save Mother Earth together. Climate was supposed to somehow automatically gather us together, but it didn't. Instead, it conflicts us completely. And our argument, me and Bruno, is that actually the big problem was that we thought that there would be a we. Why are we not acting? Because none of us know who this we is. So I would argue that one of the first problems of the Green movement is that they've not made it into a conflictual narrative, that they've not defined a we, a them, a horizon of history, a horizon of political action, since we know, you know even better than I do, that social history, every time you declare conflict or struggle, you actually have a lot easier of a possibility of mobilizing people, of mobilizing them effectually, as well as in terms of action. So the ecologists have managed to bore all of us to death. they've not given, let's say, a narrative, a horizon, an ideological content. Instead, they've been relatively, I would say, and I say the same to the Greens. I mean, they agree. That's the weird thing. They've been too moralistic, too fatalistic, and at the same time, they imagine that people just act by themselves. They've not done what every ideology ever had, which was to define a we, a them, a what this we is fighting for, and again, what the course of history was going. So I think that would be one of the arguments, at least.
One of the, I would say, strongest points of this book memorandum on the new ecological class is that, to put it simple, but you say it like that, I think explicitly, that climate crisis is class struggle. And then, together with Bruno Latour, but you have already been developing this concept in your PhD thesis in Copenhagen, you developed the concept of a geosocial class. Could you elaborate that a bit further? What's the difference between the traditional Marxist concept of class and where do you see this class arising today, if you see it arising?
It's a long story. It was a very long PhD thesis, but the question of geosocial class and the geosocial landscape is just simply to say that today and in the future, the social struggles, the social conflicts, the class questions are being more and more related to land, soil, earth, and the conditions of earthly subsistence, and so on and so forth. Of course, it always was somehow, but now it is intensifying, and it might even become a defining, let's say, question of class struggles. In certain ways, it will intensify the old sort of class struggle, but what we also argue that we begin seeing is a new sort of struggles, a new sort of conflicts, a new sort of battles that actually cross in another direction than the previous struggles that you know a lot about. The classical questions of class struggles over the means of production, or how to distribute the fruits of production, as in the history of socialism, of course, and so on and so forth. What we are arguing is that we are beginning to see what we argue we also should be building, what we argue that we must normatively construct. Class is always both descriptive and performative, as we need to remember. It's a class that is fighting not for the means of production, not only taking over the fruits of production as well, but it's fighting against the horizon of production, exactly because it's realized that production right now, or the system of production, has become a system of destruction that every day as we go by is threatening our conditions of habitability. Where do we see that? Well, there is examples that they are numerous. If you go to Germany, you see the young people or even the locals of a city called Lützerath fighting against the expansion of a coal mine. Indigenous people all over the world are fighting for their territories against extractivism of production and so on and so forth. In my own home city that I spoke about before, there's recently been a big conflict where they were arguing whether the port should be expanded. But maybe you had the same questions here about this port, where people are arguing that let's say the ecological consequences of a port expansion, which would be for growth and for jobs and so on and so forth, exactly destroys the conditions of habitability. So again, you see a new line between those who are not only fighting either to keep or to take over the means of production, but who's actually fighting against production, right? Against those who are fighting to keep on expanding production. And that's a new thing. That's something we haven't really seen before. And what we then argue is that that class, which would be fighting for safeguarding, for repairing, for maintaining the conditions of habitability, the earthly means of subsistence, and who's fighting against the horizon of production, could be what we name an ecological class. Again, it's a politically fictive argument in a sense. Of course, we don't see already a well-defined ecological class, at least not one that is class conscious, but we begin to see the silhouettes of social struggles and the emergence of a movement that is again having another direction in history. Our argument is, of course, a little bit the same as when Marx in the 19th and the 20th century, or tried to define, a people that corresponded to the social question of the 19th and the 20th century. Then what we are trying to say must emerge, what we're trying to point out the silhouettes of, is a political subject that can somehow stand against, let's say, the new sorts of injustices that we are seeing in the Anthropocene, the ecological question, so to say. So that's our argument.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's my feeling, or at least what I can see when I look at the situation among this emerging new social class, that after 2018, 2019, you had, through the climate movement, mainly through children, the emergence of what you are writing about. So you had first, of course, it was the privileged children from Sweden and Germany and countries like that. Of course, it wasn't children in Serbia, Bulgaria, or Bosnia, for instance, because they had real problems, to put it like that again, in a very sarcastic way, but also in a very tragic way, I would say. And you had this emergence of this class, I would say. But then what happened, I would say, is, at least that's my kind of opinion, what happened was 7th of October, which caused a kind of disruption in this geosocial class, mainly composed of youngsters, of children who are not children anymore, but started faculties and so on. And as a consequence of the horrific war, which is happening right now still, although a ceasefire was announced in Gaza, is that you had a division between the movement, mainly between the German parts of the movement.
Inside the movement, you mean?
Inside of the movement, yes. So the Germans, of course, I think I don't have to explain much about the situation in Germany concerning this specific situation and how difficult it is even to talk about Gaza there in the way which is not the official line of it. So the German part of the movement, of course, inclined with the Green Party of Germany, which, if you ask me, I would go even further in criticism, is nothing more but a war party at this moment. As we know, war is one, of course, major contributors to climate crisis as well. And on the other hand, you had Greta Thunberg, which I think it was Spiegel or some German newspaper called her Greta non grata. So someone who was not welcome anymore in Germany. So how do you explain this disruption inside of the climate movement? How do you see it going? And why is it that parts of the climate movement don't understand the logic of war and the consequences of war? For instance, in the case of Gaza, 97% of water is contaminated. People are already living a climate apocalypse. But when you read the evidence and the testimonies from people who are climate researchers in Gaza or in the West Bank, you will see that they themselves will say something very similar to the Romanian. They say, yes, we know very well that this is even causing further climate crisis in all aspects. I mean, the damage of the buildings, the toxic waste which is coming out, the radioactive waste, and then, of course, when Gaza will be rebuilt, that will also have huge effects on the climate, because we know this kind of investment, building cement, steel, and all the materials and operation of the machines creates further climate breakdown. So how would you explain this? First question, this division inside of the climate movement. Second question, how can we go beyond it? And why do you think that, especially the German part of the climate movement and the Greens, although they claim to be green and care about the planet, actually are for the war? To put it simple as that.
I'm not sure about the premise, okay, but I'll try to answer. First, I'd like to go back to where you started. I'm not sure that it was only in 2020, or last year, sorry, 7th October, that there became a disbursement, that there became a lack of support. I would actually say it started already with February 2022, right? Like the war in Ukraine and so on and so forth. Not
that much as with, it wasn't such a big break.
I would say that already there began to be what our own Prime Minister in Denmark would call real problems. Security issues returned, so to say. But of course, you're completely right. What afterwards happened? Oh, that's nice.
Thanks a lot. We still have water. Speaking about water.
That's a nice job. Real problems. Anyways, but you're of course completely right that it dispersed even more with the situation in Gaza. I think you have the answer as much as I do to why, especially in Germany. It's a pregnant question. But what I would like to do with the question is instead to speak about two different possibilities of constructing alliances within the climate movement. Now, even if I am obviously know where I stand, and that's on the side against the genocide, that I would not be afraid to call it, in Palestine, then I've personally been discussing a lot with, for example, somebody like Louisa, what the right strategy, not only in
Maybe
relation...
just for the people who don't know, Luisa
Luisa Neubauer is an important climate activist, the German head of Fridays for Future and so on and so forth. What would be the right way to construct as much alliances for a green movement? I believe that the green will disperse itself even more. It will annihilate itself if it becomes, let's say, a tick-off manual where you have to be pro-queer, where you have to be pro-Palestine, where you have to be pro-trans, where you have to be pro all these different very important topics, if you are also green. What I would instead do, what we try to do also in the book, is say, if you are green, if you are ecologically, let's say, interested, but then of course, the other way around. If you are pro-Palestine, but of course you should care about the question of the climate because it's also a colonial situation. If you are very into the question of the exploitation of female through history, then of course you should be interested in the question of the climate because it's always the production system that has destroyed the women. If you are for workers' rights and so on and so forth, of course you should care about the climate and let's say, struggle against production because production has always destroyed workers and so on and so forth. And that's simply in order to somehow create a possibility where you make alliances instead of cutting them off. So I think, I cannot describe exactly why it dispersed, except by saying that they decided to do so themselves. They decided to say, if you are not in this box or in that box or in this box, then you cannot be a part of the movement. Certain aspects of it. I think Luisa would completely agree with me. If you cut off potential alliances instead of making them, you're going to annihilate completely the green, let's say, the ecological class, or what could have been so. Of course, in Germany, it's a very, very tough question to speak about these issues, and for good reasons. But even Luisa would not shy away from them, I would say.
Okay, I think soon we should also, thanks a lot for your response, we should open the floor but to the questions, and I hope you prepared some of them or you came to some questions in the meantime. But before we open the floor, in Ljubljana we have also been talking about arts, and we are in a theater, in magnificent theater, where arts, all sorts of arts happens, from ballet, opera to theater, and also now this kind of different kind of formats which didn't happen yet here. You talked very inspiring about the paintings of Van Gogh and Edvard Munch, for instance. And at the same time, we also briefly touched upon architecture. You also teach at the Faculty of Architecture since recently and have been involved in discussions with architects, with painters, and so on. So my question is, how can arts, painting or architecture, or choose whatever you want, help us in shedding light on this new sensibility in the Anthropocene, and how could it help us coordinate and navigate?
Art is absolutely crucial, because what we are living in is not a crisis of knowledge, it's not even a crisis of economy. It's a crisis of sensibility, it's a crisis of imagination, and what the arts have always done is to render that thing sensitive, to make us fathom on an emotional level that which we did not feel or fathom, was sensitive to before. So the arts are absolutely crucial. Think about what Frida Kahlo did for communism, if I'm not wrong, what Godard did for socialism, what Jack Kerouac and his book on freedom did for liberalism. The arts is what makes us touched, it's what makes us feel, it's what makes us mirror ourselves in something that we know that we can somehow see as a new civilizational question, but that we still don't feel. It's related very much to another thing we speak a lot about in the book of why the green movement, the green parties and so on and so forth have not managed to somehow win people over. It's because they simply did not, let's say, engage themselves in the cultural struggle of ideas. Somebody's phone is on. If
we can hear it except the person itself. Still on.
It's fascinating. Anyways, we'll have to ding-dong that through. Arts does what Donna Haraway would call a response ability. It gives you the ability to respond. It sensitizes you to the situation.
Maybe it's Donna Haraway, or who is it? Can you please switch off the phone?
Like Ursula Le Guin would say, you need, of course, both the sciences, let's say the curiosity of the sciences, and the risk of aesthetics. So again, I would say that perhaps more than anybody, what is needed in the climate movement is artists that works together with the Greens in order to somehow make people again sense and feel these things. Okay, here's the situation. You turn on the TV, the end of the world is on prime time, right? Like seemingly Jill Scott Heron was wrong, that the revolution, or he was right, the revolution will not be televised, but the world is on fire and the end of it is being televised. What you see is that you see a liberal party candidate, a socialist and a conservative walk on stage, and a Green Party, our poor friend, right? It takes you approximately 3 minutes, 3 seconds to find out that there is absolutely no realistic coincide between a people, a politics, and a planet in the old ideologies. Why? Because they're simply basing their ideologies on production. But what they do have is a whole image of narratives, notions, aesthetics, images that touches people, that allows their political project to somehow win over the minds, hearts, and the souls. Politics is about feeling something. It's about being able to mirror yourself in something. The socialist might speak about social equality. The liberalist might speak about personal freedom. The conservative might speak about the land, the people. All these notions, all these images, all these dreams that have been mirrored through the arts that allows you to feel it. Our poor friend again, the Green Party candidate, comes on stage and he says, the world is ending and we have to act. It's boring. The world ending is unfortunately a very boring incentive to vote. Voting is about wanting to vote something. It's about wanting to vote something over something else. So you have to give desirable content. And here, my argumentation with that the aesthetics, the rendering sensitive that all arts have always been able to contribute with, is one of the primary strategies for art not to bore ourselves, or sorry, for ecology not to bore all of us to death. Jenny Hulso, I think we spoke about yesterday, has a brilliant quote. She says that, what is the saying again? Lack of charisma can be fatal. That's unfortunately something the Green didn't really pick up on.
Thanks a lot. And if I may ask for some light, so we can see you finally as well in the audience. Light is coming. And also, I hope hands are coming as well. So this is the opportunity to
Did we find out whose phone it was? He's not getting the microphone.
Don't shame them. Next time it won't happen. Please, ako imate pitanje, if you have questions, please raise the hands. I think we have 2 mics here. We don't have any mics up, but it's a theater, so the acoustics is good. You can shout. And we'll try to make sure that everyone can pose the questions. So please, we are looking at you. I can see a question already there at the back, and the mic is coming to you. Thanks a lot for breaking the ice.
Hello. So I have a question, and you mentioned this incident actually 10 days ago in California with the fires and everything.
Maybe you could stand up so we can see you better.
Sorry.
If it's not, yeah.
Bad manners from my side, sorry.
No, it's not.
So in California during the fires, everything that happened and actually is still happening, which you referenced to be connected with climate change. So during this occurrence, there has been, I would say, quite strong current of people, spokespeople, even tomorrow's current president saying that the climate change is not real. So how do you propose that we can, let's say, or the climate movement change can tackle these kind of occurrences with very strong, I would say, authority figures combating it?
Yeah, but I would say that they live in a false due social class consciousness. They see their country burning down, and they look the other direction. I don't know what to do about America.
Thank you. Excellent answer.
But it's an interesting question, of course, because, I mean, I think with Russia was one thing that's tough. America is almost even tougher. There's one thing that has been continuous since the first day that Donald Trump held a voting meeting, where he was still doing it for the fun and the likes and the so on and so forth. That was drill, baby, drill. The last thing he said in Madison Square Garden, if I'm not wrong, is drill, baby, drill. The only thing that has been continuous in his whole thing where everything changes, especially the people around him, has been climate denial. If you then add to it a Buzz Lightyear that wants to go to Mars, called Elon Musk, you have the first escapist, let's say, governmental structure that you've ever seen. It's a complete mad invention. Think about Elon Musk. He's back to the land of the old school proto-fascism, and then whoop, fly off to Mars, hyper-modernistic. But what can you do with that? I would say you can look at them and just do the opposite. If we want to know how to land society on Earth, just look at the Americans. Do the opposite.
Next question, please. Also, if you're up, we're also looking up. First row was the fastest.
I think it can be loud.
Yes, you can be loud.
So you mentioned identifying a we and the they and the thing, but can you make it a bit more specific? What are the they?
Yeah.
The thing?
That was the big critique of our book, because we didn't spend so much time on it. Well, I would say that the they are those old classes, unfortunately, no matter how tough it sounds, or people still believing in the horizon of production. Of course, we have to create alliances everywhere as possible, but I would say that there is a new front line again. Of course, we can then, let's say, specify them as the multi-billionaires that flies around and has most of the, let's say, emissions, the big companies that are doing it all, and so on and so forth. But I think it would be impossible to say there's a we that fights against production for the safeguarding of the habitability, and there is the rest of them who wants to go in another direction. It's vague, I'm very well aware. But it's a necessary move, I'm afraid. But the reason why it's difficult is because alliances still has to be made from everywhere, so to say. But again, I would say there's now, just as before, there's those who have the means of production, there's those who don't have the means of production. What we're indicating simply is that there could be a new front line between those who fight against production for the safeguarding of the habitability conditions, and those who keeps on believing in business as usual, actually no matter if they stand on one side of the social spectrum, or one side of the political spectrum, or on the other. Think about it. I mean, we can say the socialists and the liberalists in their tradition, they were very different, but they agreed on one thing, and that was the horizon of production. That was the horizon of growth, and so on and so forth.
Sorry? We heard a comment there, but you can be louder if you have a comment. It's a theater, please. Suddenly there is silence. Anyhow, if you have a comment, you can also... Oh, I can see a hand there. Thanks a lot.
I'll try to be louder.
Yes, even louder.
I think Sam Robinson's Racing for the Future.
Terrifying.
Yes. And, it turns out that he has the idea that it could be changed, but not that much. What to think about that?
What could be changed again?
Of course, climate change could be solved, and it could be reversed in a couple of generations, but unfortunately, not that violence against them. And that's also what.
But we know what to do. You can't stop climate change, but you can stop going towards 3 or 4 degrees heating, right? Everybody knows in here what we have to do, more or less. The question is how to make enough people vote for the people that would like that direction of history. And again, even if it doesn't somehow stop, there's still different ways to live in the ruins of capitalism. We can't just say that it's over, fatalism. You need to have some kind of hope, not naive hope, but hope that allows you to somehow act in that direction. Of course, you're completely right. There is a possibility still that we could stabilize the Earth system. Somebody like we were speaking about with yesterday, the oceanographer, the physicist, would say that we're just on the brink on reaching a threshold of the different planetary boundaries where things freak show out of control. But yeah.
If I might jump in and try to interpret your question about violence, and we talked about it yesterday actually, I think it might also go in the direction of what are the viable possible strategies. And we mentioned yesterday, you know, Andreas Malm, for instance, how to blow up a pipeline. And that's one strand in the climate movement, which is now going to, you know, sabotage, direct action. They are producing structural violence, and then we fight back. Something similar to, you know, the terrorist years in Europe during the Rote Armee Fraktion, Brigate Rossa, and so on. So, or even people who are just, you know, gluing themselves to the Autobahn and then you have the violence of the car drivers who kick them out. Or recently in Serbia, students occupying universities, and every 2 or 3 days someone almost gets killed because someone drives them over. So I think that might also be an interesting question about strategy. So what do you think about this, I would call it Leninist kind of strand, Andreas, represented by Andreas Malm, how to blow up a pipeline?
Yeah, again, it's true. I didn't hear that you were speaking about violence. Sorry about that. Yeah, but it's what we discussed yesterday. I'm a Democrat. I believe that democratic change is not only necessary, but also that it will be what stabilizes a new civilizational horizon. Of course, I completely believe or understand, the desperation that lays in this situation. But again, as somebody like Louisa would say, the problem with blowing up pipelines and so on and so forth is that it's lazy. What do you do afterwards? If you really want a stabilized new horizon of society, you need to do all the cultural work. You need to do the institutional work. You need to stabilize it on a level of democracy, so to say. Of course, there will be, like we saw in all different traditions of social struggles, a whole gamut of the bomb-throwing activists, and then there'll be the people working on the cultural and the ideological content on a more democratic level, and so on and so forth. But I think we cannot just simply go out and put a knife into the BMWs and blow up pipelines and so on and so forth if this is to be a new civilizational direction. I mean, it's the same thing that always happens when you ask a Marxist what happens after the revolution. It's and again, simply, I'm a Democrat. I believe Sloterdijk has an interesting discussion. The latest book by Sloterdijk ends with a discussion between exactly the Malmist, Leninist ecology and me and Bruno's more democratic ecology. And he's on our side, and Sloterdijk is very clever, so that's
also
good.
A bit reactionary, but but a great philosopher. Yeah, just any other questions? Maybe from the up. Okay, I can see down there is another question. Can you please raise your hand again?
Hi.
Oh, you have the mic. Great.
Maybe without the mic. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna try to be short. I don't know. So, in terms of violent action, I think this is really a problem that we have today as people. That a lot of times we are putting ourselves in opposite camps. So, for example, if we look at the history of like working class struggle, we often have a tendency that we forget that our grandparents or grandfathers, that this was at the beginning a violent struggle. It was not being done through, it was also being done through discussion, academic debates in pubs, in taverns, but the prime force of the change was pure violence in the streets, where the people were protesting, getting shot at, like just getting killed for a right to have public education, a right to have better working conditions, and numerous other things that we live today and we think it's normal. We have a tendency to forget that this was a violent struggle. And the thing, I completely agree with you, we need to think what after the revolution or what after the violence. But it's the same thing that you said, this example in Germany that happened in the Green movement, between the division of, inside of the Green movement, supporting Palestine and Israel, that's also a specific thing that's called an anti-Deutsch movement. Anti-Deutschers are an anarchist stream of, I wouldn't call them anarchists, but they call themselves anarchists, that emerged in Germany and believe in anarchist core values, but no matter what, they just blindly support Israel because I presume of all the guilt what their parents or grandparents did and how they were taught in their educational system to confront this problem. No? And I think this is a perfect example, like Palestine, Israel, what happened in the Green movement. It's like just this divide et impera strategy that the system has been used, it has been using against progressive movements. And I think when you say that I'm a Democrat and I don't support violence in the green struggle, this is also an example of us being divided, because we often also forget there is not one strategy, or like we don't attack from one angle and we don't attack with one strategy or one weapon. The thing is that these kind of complex problems need to be addressed from different kind of angles. And some of the people have a tendency to passionately blow up things. Some of the people have a tendency to go to a parliament. But we must stop demonizing political violence, because, as you said before, that you have a feeling that the Green movement is not conflictual enough. But I wouldn't say that. I think that the Green movement started like that. It was very conflictual. Like Greenpeace, for example, was a very radical movement. I had an opportunity to work with Greenpeace Norge in Norway, in Oslo, in 2008. And that movement and that organization is not doing anything anymore. You know, you have like a room with 8 TVs so everybody can have their big head over a Skype meeting. You know? You had the anti-globalization movement in the 90s and in the early 2000s that were pretty much also green movements and anti-capitalist movements that were like violently being suppressed, from Genova to in Hamburg, where people who were protesting. In Genoa in 2001, there was 1 million people on the streets from all over the world, fighting trade agreements, international trade agreements, globalization, capitalism, and like this constantly growing production. No? And these movements were violently attacked by the state, who condones violence when we do it, but they use it against us. And then they were commodified. They were commodified into NGOs, they were commodified in this position where we are now today, that when we have violent movements or grassroots movements or something that's not going through the mainstream way, are being condoned inside of the movement. I think this is the problem. And somebody that's for violence. And I really like this book, The Failure of Non-Violence. I think that's a great book that explains that we need to approach these complex problems together and in different strategies. And it's completely okay that somebody's okay to blow up a pipeline and that somebody's okay just to teach kids in kindergarten how to do it, you know? But we are not each other enemies, even if our methods are being different. So yeah, I don't know.
This is what they in the university world call comment masked as a question.
Yeah.
I mean, and unfortunately, I answer exactly the same thing as I answered before. I come from a country called Denmark, where class struggle doesn't necessarily mean cutting off the head of the king, and where I believe we actually had quite a just outcome. But of course, I'm not going to let you speak more. Sorry, mate. You can hang out with your friend afterwards. But of course, I think it's a legitimate. It's a legitimate question. I'm not saying I'm demonizing political violence. I'm just saying that the struggle cannot in any way focus on that direction. I would say the same thing as I said before.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? I know people usually don't like comments, but I'm actually happy with comments as well. To be honest, because I think it's a theater, it should be a public discussion. And I think it was a thoughtful comment, of course, because it kind of shows the situation in which we are.
It's a completely legitimate argument. I completely agree.
Sorry? On my left, far left side, from our perspective.
Well, the story Paris summer so warm that you cannot sleep. The air condition is not strong enough. It's too warm. You are suffering. You cannot sleep in Paris at night. Air condition is not strong enough, and so on. Okay, fine. What should be your attitude? Should you be angry on somebody? Should you believe that it's your fault, so you deserve to suffer? Or you should pity yourself that you are innocent victim of the circumstances? What should be the attitude? What's the right existential attitude?
No, but it's a good question, and I was surprised that we didn't get it yesterday when we were speaking about land sickness, because of course The book was criticized a lot because it does completely the opposite than me and Bruno's does, which is argue for political structural change with or without violence. But I don't think you have to choose. I think it's a completely silly argument, this idea that you either have to choose between structural political change, collective change, or individual change. That's something that the surrealists saw very well, that you can both do Rimbaud and Marx at the same time. You have to change your life, and we have to change the world at the same time. I think we've become weirdly, strangely afraid of personal responsibility in this whole question. Of course, I would say that we have to fight against capitalism and the productivist structure, the extractivist structure, and so on and so forth. But we also have to pose ourselves the question, what we are doing in this. You don't have to be a social historian to see that every time there was a very strong collective change, it also mirrored itself in the individual lives of people. I mean, I think it's such a weird argument. It's very often from very left people, I mean, I'm a leftist myself in some way, leftist in despair at least, but where people say, you cannot speak about individual responsibility because it's all about the multi-billionaires and the capitalist structures and so on and so forth. But so I can do what I want. But it's like saying, okay, racism is structural, so I can walk around and use the N-word myself. Makes no sense. I don't see why you have to choose. I don't see why you should choose, because as he said correctly before in another topic, then there must be many strategies. This question is simply so big, so all-encompassing, that you both have to change your own life and fight for political change at one at the same time. And the funny thing is that one country that understands this, to wrap it up with some of the questions we had before, is Germans. Because they were always exactly having to face the question of individual, let's say, shame, guilt, responsibility in a collective tragedy. So that would be my answer. You have to hit yourself in the head and others at the same time. You have two arms.
Thanks, and I think, yeah. I think we have time for one last question, maybe from up or even the balcony. I don't know, we can barely see you at the balcony. Do you have a question maybe from the balcony? No? Or a comment? Okay, or a joke? No, nothing. So second floor, okay, I can see a question.
Since we are in the theater, we have to remember what Kierkegaard said. About
you could quote it. You are from Denmark.
Well, it's actually from you. But Kierkegaard has a great... I was reminded when I read his book that he said that the way that the world will end is being in a theater. And the clown... Yes, we saw your hand, but wait, I'm doing a joke. You need to let me do a joke and then I'll give you the phone. He said, the world is ending in the following way. A clown, there's a theater backstage. There's a fire backstage in a theater, and the clown runs on the stage saying, the theater is burning. The theater is burning. People are, ha 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 ha. He goes backstage again, it's burning. And people are, ha 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 ha. And he says, that is how the world will end.
With applause from those who don't believe that it's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, I changed my mind because I saw that hand and Nikolaj saw that hand. We have two last questions. First we go with my candidate from the right, and then we get your question because you were disrupting the joke, and then that's a little punishment. It wasn't you, it was your colleague. Okay, so please, on the right hand, on the right side. It was you?
Yes. Hi. We're from Denmark as well.
Where are you from?
We are here, we work with youth and a teacher at a højskole. So kind of privileged Danish youth that don't have real problems. No, and I think some years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, it was kind of sexy to be worried about climate, being green. Now it changed. And they're really, I don't see many young people tonight. They're really tired of listening to us, old people that destroyed the world, telling them the world is ending, it's your problem. And I just see this kind of fatalistic, they're starting to give up, They buy all the shit on Temu, the Zalando, and they really don't care anymore. It's not sexy to be political in any way. They're very, very scared to offend anybody. And I don't know how to change that as a real...
No, but it's extremely interesting. I'm not sure you can do a full empirical analysis based on what you see there, but of course you are mentioning something that is very, 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 very true. I would say, if I'm not wrong about the statistics, at least in Denmark, either the youth is very, very green leftish, or they're actually really, really not right-wing, but very, very liberal in the sense of they're very economized liberal party in Denmark. Nye Borgerlige, it's like, no, what's the name of it? Ny Alliance, Liberal Alliance. And that's an interesting thing, a twist, I would say. But is it because we've been stuffing down their throats that the world is ending, or is it because we didn't give them a possibility to mirror themselves in that direction? That would be my one question. The second question I'm asking in relation to some of the same things, now we're going to take it away from Denmark, but for example, like a country like Germany, where some of the young people are turning really, really right. The only way I think to explain that, and it is completely related to what you're saying, is that if you in 68, 70s were fighting against moralism, you were fighting from the left against the right, or against the bourgeoisie, against the conservatives, the stabilized structure and so on and so forth. But today, if you're fighting against moralism, you're actually fighting from right against left, right? So what I'm trying to say with this is that I'm completely agreeing with you that the question of the moralism that has been very pregnant in the green cause, but on a lot of other aspects of the left as well, is very, very dangerous. My argument would be to give them again a narrative, a struggle front line, a possibility of actually believing that this is not a moralistic struggle. No, it's a battle. That's what I would say, but I see completely what you mean. It's very difficult to understand. I cannot explain that certain amounts of the youth in, for example, Germany are now turning right-wing. I don't believe 1 second that they are racists. I think they are tired of moralisms, tired of being told what they should say, what they should do, what they should feel, or what they should buy, and so on and so forth. And I think that's a general thing the left has to take into consideration these days.
Mm-hmm. When your Danish colleague was posing a question, I saw a new question who was really insisting to pose a question. Don't worry, I'm not forgetting you, and you will have to be a bit patient, because I think, is it related directly to the... Yes. Okay, please, just a bit louder. And then it's you have the last question.
I just wanted to comment, as a young person recently connected to the fires in California, I asked one of my friends his opinion. I was like, are you seeing what's happening? I mean, people are losing their homes and it's catastrophical. And he told me, I don't really care. I mean, it's only the rich people lose their homes, and it doesn't matter, they can just buy a new house. And I told him, I mean, I understand, but even if out of the 2,000 people, rich people that lost their house, even if 3, 4 people that can't buy a new one lost one, is that not an issue to you? Do you not care? And he said, I don't know, I don't think it's that big of a problem. I can't deal with it anymore. He just gave up, basically.
That's an interesting, tragic paralysis of affect.
But it's kind of, I had a similar, if I may jump in, similar comment by 2 of my friends who were even harsher and said, I don't give a fuck. Because for centuries you had United States imperialism and so on, and obviously that's wrong, of course. I have friends in LA, even if I didn't have friends, I would be empathetic about it. But I think it shows that if for centuries you are actually colonizing the world and doing bad things in the world, you will get less empathy. That would be just my comment out of my head.
But I think what I myself found myself thinking was the amount of attention these fires have gotten compared to the amount of lack of attention climate disasters everywhere else has gotten on a global level was also quite weird. But again, yeah, it's.
Yeah. Maybe it shows our future. They have private firefighters. I hope that will not become our future in Croatia. But we already had this situation with the rich people, HDZ people, who protect their houses, and then, you know, the van with water comes in front of the villa in order to protect them. So you don't have to go to California to find inequality. You can find it in Croatia as well. Last question, please. Sorry for not having more questions, but Nikolaj should come back to Rijeka.
I mean, from what I gathered from what you were saying about...
Also, a bit louder, because here we cannot hear you the same way you can hear yourself.
Okay, perfect. From what I gathered that you were speaking about regarding the left, as a leftist myself, I feel like there's an oversaturation of identity and symbology that is present. And I don't think it doesn't take Einstein to understand that there is an issue with it. You see it, I see it, my friends at uni see it. Why do you think they do not see it? Because I think it's...
The left?
Yeah, the left themselves, or a lot of them, or at least the way that they present themselves. I feel like they've convinced themselves of this collective everything, and I don't see how they're not seeing the feedback that it's not working, because...
Not only that it's not working, but it is actually creating a complete opposite turn than what they're trying to fight for. Yeah, that is really also one of the enigmas for me. I know people who consider them... the whole question is, because obviously everybody believes in the... Everybody on the left, many people believe in the values of diversity politics, identity politics, and so on and so forth, but it's the tonality. It's the tonality that has been a complete disaster, and I am in complete shock myself that it's not something that has led to more, let's say, more self-reflection. Identity is very nice, as Bruno used to say, but you cannot eat identity. You cannot breathe identity at the same time. So at the very moment where the material inequalities on both a classical economical aspect away and on the new climatic question that has taken up so much space is for me disastrous, especially when you see how it makes people ethics go in a completely different direction. One of my arguments would probably, it is a complete hypothesis, it's a little bit late, but the de-ethics of the climate question comes from the oversaturation of some of the other questions there. I'm very afraid that the question of the climate has become something that has been put into the same box of an oversaturated, to use your own words, mode of speaking about identity, mode of speaking about inclusionary politics that I obviously believe in the principles of, but not in the way that they've been, let's say, tonalized. It's a mystery. You're right.
I think there is a famous quote saying that in the end everything will be okay. If it's not okay, it's not the end. This is unfortunately the end of tonight's evening. But before you leave the theater, let me remind you that you can find this book and hopefully the other one very soon in the foyer of the theater. And I hope Nikolaj will be happy to sign a few copies. So just wait for us once we come from backstage to the foyer. And also a little announcement for everyone who is here that this program is going on. The next guest of the Filozofski Teatar, which will happen in cooperation and at the Place of Art Kino Croatia, is Igor Bezinović. A dear friend of mine, also one of the best documentary, but also not just documentary filmmakers in Croatia, whose new movie Fiume o Morte will premiere at the end of this month, I think, or beginning of next month in Rotterdam, and it will also premiere in Rijeka, I think, and then later we'll have a conversation with him. So I kindly invite you to join that. And now, big applause, and thank you, Nikolaj, for being here in Rijeka. Say what it is, but they cut us off.
I need a photo for my mother. I'm sorry, I don't.
It's for Nikolaj's mother. We have to make a photo, but my storage is full. So
she doesn't believe it's true that I'm speaking in the theater.
you.